Early 1944, Nazi Germany. Allied bombing raids have reduced the fighter aircraft production of German factories by as much as 2/3. In order to reduce the effectiveness of Allied bombing, the Reich Ministry of Armaments and War Production, led by Albert Speer and the SS, agreed to accelerate construction of massive underground factories to move production there. New concrete bunkers using concentration camp prisoners are to be built, because existing underground areas such as caves and mines are not suited to factory production. In 1944 and 1945, hundreds of satellite camps attached to major concentration camps are established throughout the German Reich, where inmates are forced to hollow out the sides of mountains or caves for immense systems of tunnels and factories to build new weaponry such as the Messerschmitt 262 jet fighter or V-2 rockets. One such camp becomes Kaufering, and among its personnel is a man who becomes notorious for his brutal abuse of prisoners, even shooting and beating some of them to death. His name is Wilhelm Tempel. Wilhelm Tempel was born on the 1st of November 1908 in what was then the German Empire. In 1932, 1 year before Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party came into power, the 23-year-old Tempel joined the SS. After 1934, SS officers commanded all concentration camps in Germany and in German-occupied territory. The Nazi camp system began as a system of repression directed against political opponents of the Nazi state. In the early years of the Third Reich, the Nazis imprisoned primarily communists and socialists. In about 1935, the regime also began to imprison those whom it designated as racially or biologically inferior, especially the Jews. During World War II, the organization and scale of the Nazi camp system expanded rapidly, and the purpose of the camps evolved beyond imprisonment toward forced labor and outright murder. The concentration camps were guarded and administered by units known as SS Death's Head units. Although the security police, which consisted of the political police, the Gestapo, and the criminal police, the Kripo, had exclusive authority to incarcerate, release, and officially order the execution of prisoners, the daily life of the prisoners lay in the brutal and merciless hands of the camp commandants and these SS Death's Head units, which were not part of the police forces. The Second World War, which began on the 1st of September 1939, brought unprecedented growth in both the number of camps and the number of prisoners. The camp population came to include prisoners from almost every European nation. Prisoners in all the concentration camps were literally worked to death. According to SS reports, there were more than 700,000 prisoners registered in the concentration camps in January 1945. Wilhelm Tempel also became part of the Nazi camp system. In May 1940, he became a member of the Waffen-SS, which was the military branch of the SS. Units of the Waffen-SS took part in most of the major military campaigns of World War II, and they were heavily involved in the commission of the Holocaust through their participation in mass shootings, anti-partisan warfare, and in supplying guards for Nazi concentration camps. In October 1942, Tempel was transferred to Majdanek and then to Auschwitz. Both concentration camps were located in German-occupied Poland and served as extermination sites, where mass killings, primarily targeting Jews, were carried out using Zyklon B gas. Both also exploited prisoners for forced labor to support the Nazi war effort. Tempel stayed at Auschwitz until the 25th of July 1944, and then on the 6th of August of the same year, he came to Dachau, located 20 kilometers north of Munich in Bavaria, Germany. 9 days later, on the 15th of August, he was sent to Kaufering IV, one of 11 subcamps of the Kaufering concentration camp complex. In Bavaria, two major camp systems, Mühldorf and Kaufering, were set up as subcamps of the Dachau concentration camp, where the inmates provided the labor necessary to build subterranean facilities for fighter aircraft production in the Landsberg area. The region was chosen in part because of its favorable geological composition for the construction of huge underground installations, which were to be insulated by 9 to 15 feet thick concrete walls. People who arrived at the Kaufering subcamps had already been held in other camps or ghettos, or had been forced to march long distances. They were therefore already very weak when they arrived at Kaufering, where they were then forced to do hard labor, such as clearing trees, removing tree roots, building earth walls, laying rails, and loading and unloading cement bags, and other heavy goods with little food. Instead of in the gas chamber, Jewish prisoners in the Kaufering subcamps were driven to their deaths with hard work for the German arms production. Prisoners had to line up for roll call as early as 5 a.m. and then walk to their workplaces, sometimes over long distances. In addition to the daytime work, there were also night shifts, during which accidents occurred easily as people fell asleep or collapsed from exhaustion and fatigue. Due to the frequent contact with cement dust, many prisoners also suffered from rashes. In addition, illnesses resulted from hypothermia. There was no bandaging material or medication available, and the less resistant among the prisoners died after only a few weeks. The others died after a few months. In Kaufering IV, Wilhelm Tempel became a report leader and leader of labor service. Kaufering IV was located between the villages of Kaufering and Hurlach and was established in September 1944 for 500 prisoners. The population later grew to 3,000. According to testimonies of the prisoners, Tempel's name was a word of horror. His duties involved conducting roll calls and arranging the work details which left the camp, and he abused his position of power. Prisoners were not safe when he was around. He shot them, whipped them, and kicked them mercilessly. He beat them with a stick and rubber cable, or when he was in a good mood, he just slapped them. Once he killed a Russian because he had bent down to pick up some bread. Chaim Sendowski, then a 39-year-old tailor from Poland, testified about what happened when his detail was sorting rocks in a ditch. Sendowski said, "6 of us were throwing rocks through a screen, so we could only get small rocks. Wilhelm Tempel said, 'If you bend the wire of the screen, I'm going to beat you.' But we had to throw the rocks against it, so naturally we had to bend the wire. So he beat us, and we had to work. My comrade said, maybe we should ask how we are supposed to do it without bending it. We were always afraid to ask. Then my friend said, I will ask him. He said, Mr. Rapportführer, please show us how to do it. Then Tempel used a rubber-coated cable and beat that man terribly, and later on, he also kicked him. He beat that man until he didn't have any strength to get up, and the blood was just pouring from his head. Afterwards, Tempel said, take this dirt away. I took him to the hospital, and he was very ill, and his arm was broken. And on the next morning, I went to see how he was doing. I brought him soup. I couldn't give him the soup because he was already dead. Other inmates testified that Wilhelm Tempel abused even the sick inmates. One of the Kaufering survivors, Norbert Fried, later described living conditions there. We lived in so-called earth huts, a trench covered with a roof. There was one window and one door. 50 prisoners in each hut, 12 meters long and less than 2 meters wide. We slept on the wooden floor, one blanket but no pillow. We put our head on our shoes, which being of priceless value, were often stolen. There were only 3 latrines for 3,000 prisoners, always overflowing with filth. We had to walk through that filth, go back and put the shoes again under our heads. Anyone who would lose his shoes would get the penalty of death. During roll calls, Tempel and the camp doctors segregated those who could work from those who could not. Sometimes, these formations lasted long periods of time, because Tempel ordered those who had shoes on and were not able to work to give them to the ones that were able to work and did not have shoes. Tempel called that teaching them German socialism. On the 15th of December 1944, Kaufering IV was declared a sick camp, where prisoners were sent to die after they could no longer work. When a typhus epidemic broke out in early 1945, the camp physician Dr. Max Blanke and the SS guards would not enter the barracks to avoid infection, and the prisoner doctors could do little as they had no medicine or equipment. It was in January 1945 when Tempel left Kaufering IV and was assigned to Kaufering I, where he served as report leader. He became known there for beating prisoners. He not only struck them in the face with his hand, but he often knocked them down. As US armed forces approached the Kaufering complex in late April 1945, the SS began evacuating the camps, sending the prisoners on death marches in the direction of Dachau. Those inmates who could not keep up were often shot or beaten to death by the guards. There were 3 transports from Kaufering I, one each for the 24th, 25th, and 26th of April. Wilhelm Tempel's duty was to collect prisoners for evacuation and to see that the camp was cleared. He employed capos and elders appointed by the SS to help him. On the 27th of April, 1945, one day after the last transport from Kaufering I, the SS set Kaufering IV, the concentration camp where Wilhelm Tempel committed most of his atrocities, on fire. The 360 Jewish prisoners, who were too weak to be transported, were locked in their huts and told they would be shot if they came out. Some inmates burned to death in their huts. Others found strength to break down the doors and crawled out to die in the streets. The Second World War in Europe ended on the 8th of May, 1945. 6 months later, on the 15th of November 1945, Wilhelm Tempel, a married man with 5 children, finally faced justice for his crimes when he was tried at the Dachau trial, at which 9 of the 40 defendants were charged with crimes committed at Kaufering. The trial lasted from the 15th of November to the 13th of December 1945, with 70 witnesses called for the prosecution and 50 witnesses called for the defense. All 40 defendants were found guilty, with 36, including Tempel, being sentenced to death by hanging. The sentence took into account Tempel's severe mistreatment of prisoners by beating them with a rubber baton and the shooting of several prisoners as individual acts of excess. His sentence was carried out by the British executioner Albert Pierpoint. When Tempel was executed by hanging in Landsberg War Crimes Prison on the 29th of May, 1946, he was 37 years old. Before his execution, his last words were, "I became anti-Semitic. It was a good thing I am being executed. I would have killed thousands of Jews." There were no tears shed for Wilhelm Tempel.
Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.